Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
Hey, welcome everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. It's great to be with you today. I am Gary Michuta, your host and sensei for this hour, and it's always great to get back in the seat and work through this thing we call apologetics. That is being able to explain, defend the faith with confidence, clarity, and charity. And got a great show in store for you today. We have our good friend William Albrecht coming back into the dojo. Many of you are already familiar with William. He's been a regular on the show. He probably does more debates than I think anybody that I know. That says a lot. In fact, William just recently came off a debate, and that's going to be the topic, by the way, for this program today. There's this myth out there that there are 5 popes in church history that supposedly deny that Mary was immaculately conceived. And so this has been bandied about in certain circles for a while. And William reminds me a lot of myself in that we both are research nerds. We love to dig and learn. And it's so much fun. But with the faith, you dig, you learn so much about Christ and his church. It's just amazing. Well, anyway, he did some digging, and he kind of debunked this whole 5 Pope myth, that denied the Immaculate Conception. So he's going to come on the other side of the break. Yeah, I was jamming with the intro music. That's right, Mary. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to tear this apart, and hopefully we can, bury this myth along with all the other no popery myths that, we live and breathe. I mean, it's funny how anti-Catholic myths have no basis for their beliefs, and yet they're like zombies. It's like the zombie apocalypse of myths that this no popery history still walks the earth despite no visible means of support. So William's going to come on the other side of the break. Also, we are going to do our critical thinking skills exercise with our Finding the Fallacy. Today's Finding the Fallacy, by the way, is Chronological Snobbery. And we also are going to meet an early church father. Today's early church father is St. HILARY of Poitiers. Very big church father, very important. And, so we got a lot of stuff in store for us. Lest I forget, I want to welcome all of you watching via live stream on social media, namely on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. Welcome to the dojo. There's plenty of room. And, it's great to see lots of familiar names, emojis there in the dojo, social media section of the dojo. I appreciate that. Also, I want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the country and around the world via podcast. Welcome aboard, folks. Great to have you with us. And also, if you have a question for William, give us a call. Toll free at 888-526-2151. That's 888-526-2151. Or you can always send your emails to questions@handsonapologetics.com. And that is the official Hands On Apologetics website mailbox, I guess you could say. The website for me is of course, handsonapologetics.com. But if you want to send an email, just go to questions@handsonapologetics.com. It comes straight to the dojo mailbox. I do answer all the emails. And even occasionally, if they're very interesting and instructive, we will do a show. We'll read them on the air. So keep them coming, folks. Love to hear from you. All right, so without further ado, why don't we jump into the Finding the Fallacy for today, which is the chronological snobbery fallacy. The expression, by the way, chronological snobbery, was first introduced by none other than C.S. Lewis and Owen Barfield. It is a belief that things like scientific theories and art from years ago are automatically lesser than things in the present. This is kind of like a revisionist fallacy. We talked about that a few programs ago, where, we kind of been trained to think of whatever's the latest and greatest as the best. The latest model of television is better than the older models of television, or latest model of car is better than the older models. Version 2.0 is always better than version 1.0. We're always used to, the latest updates are the best. But, quite frankly, that doesn't square with every field in life, and that's what chronological snobbery kind of tries to take advantage of. It tries to dismiss, downplay, kind of look down one's nose at something simply because it is not something recent, right? Or it is a time-honored belief. So we run into a lot today. And, of course, when it comes to something like Christianity or Catholicism, well, Christianity, old is good. You want to find out what was it that Christ taught? What was it that the apostles handed down to the church to be taught through the ages? And in that sense, the old is the gold standard. It's not the newest fads or theological trends that are important. What's matter is really getting down to that core deposit of faith, and that is our finding the fallacy of chronological snobbery. All right, let's jump to the Meet the Early Church Father for today, who, by the way, is Hilary of Poitiers. He was born sometime around AD 315, died somewhere around 367 to 368. St. Hilary is known as the Athanasius of the West, so-called because of his staunch support of the Nicene doctrine against the Arians. By the way, who are the Arians? The Arians were an early Christian heresy that believed that the Son was not co-eternal with the Father, that the Son was created by the Father, so there was a time where there was just the Father and not the Son, and as a result, the Son was not equal or consubstantial with the Father. He isn't of the same stuff or essence or substance of the Father, but he's kind of a lesser God, almost like what's that term for? We'll just say lesser God. So that's Arianism, and Arianism really exploded in the 4th century, and because it was very easy for pagans to kind of say, yeah, I can agree with that. The doctrine of the Trinity is a little too tough for me, but I can understand, deities being created by higher deities and things like that. Well, anyway, St. Hilary was a staunch supporter of the Nicene doctrine, which confirmed the concept, as we profess in the Creed every Sunday, that the Son is consubstantial with the Father. He was born of a wealthy pagan family in Poitiers. He received a very excellent education in philosophy and rhetoric, and after studying the Old and New Testament scriptures, he was converted to the faith. So he's an intellectual convert. Now, though he was married, the clergy and laity of his native city elected him as their bishop in 350 A.D. In 356 A.D., Hilary was exiled by Constantius to Phrygia in Asia Minor because he had been organizing resistance against the Metropolitan of Gaul, Gaul's modern-day France, Saturnus of Arles, who, by the way, had Arian tendencies. But he made so much mischief for the Arians in Asia Minor that Hilary is sent packing back to Gaul to his own see in 359 AD, where he promptly obtained the excommunication of Saturnus. That Arianism in the West crumbled so quickly after the death of Constantius is largely due to the long-standing and strenuous efforts of Hilary, who died sometime around 367-368, and he's proclaimed the doctor of the Church by Pope Pius IX in 1851. There's two works that you apologists need to know about Hilary, very important works. One is his commentary on the Gospel of Matthew. This commentary probably dates to when he was in exile in Phrygia around 356. It is a genuine work of Hilary, and it may be reworked homilies that were presented in a commentary form. His other work, which is very, very important and influential, is his work on the Trinity. De Trinitate. Let's see. John Cassian. It's known by various titles. Jerome knew it under three different titles. John Cassian knew it as De Fide, of the faith. But the correct title is De Trinitate, concerning the Trinity. It was recognized as early as the 6th century as Hilary's masterpiece. It's quite lengthy treatise in 12 books. But the entire work on the Trinity seems to be written again during Hilary's Phrygian exile, sometime around the years 356, 359 AD. So, I think this is a great lesson for all of us in terms of God's providence, because if you put yourself in the sandals of St. Hilary of Poitiers, battling against the Arians, to have things switch and you end up being sent into exile to Phrygia, you might think, what's God's plan in my life? Well, what good am I going to do in Phrygia? Well, look at the example of what St. Hilary does. First, he makes life miserable for the Arians in Phrygia, so they want to get rid of him. They send him back to where he was before, and ultimately he's able to depose of this Arian bishop. So, and also, by the way, notice that 2 of his best works were penned while in exile. So, God's providence, it works in some mysterious ways sometimes, and sometimes when things seem darkest, it's actually the most fruitful. All right, I hear the music coming up on the other side of the break. We have Master Apologist William Albrecht coming into the dojo, and we're going to talk about his recent debate on 5 popes who supposedly denied the Immaculate Conception.
This is Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio. This March, VMPR, in association with the Catholic Resource Center, will be hosting a special conference for the Adoramus Society. Adoramus at the Triduum, a conference on the spirituality of the Triduum liturgies, featuring speakers Father Joseph Fessio, Dr. Anthony Lillis, and Christopher Karstens, addressing such topics as developing a liturgical spirituality, the spirituality of Holy Thursday, the spirituality of Good Friday, and the spirituality of the Paschal Vigil and Easter season. It all takes place March 14th, 2020 at the historic Sacred Heart Chapel at 381 West Center Street, Covina, California, 91723. You can register online at vmpr.org or call now at 877-526-2151 to reserve your seat today for Adoramus at the Triduum.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. And, what I love about this program is I get to rub elbows with a lot of people that are working in the field in many different ways. A lot of them are authors, researchers, teachers, professors, and also debaters, and perhaps one of the foremost people in debate out there from the Catholic side is our guest, who is William Albrecht. William, by the way, is a convert to the Catholic faith. He's an international speaker and debater. He's participated in well over 50 live and moderated debates. William runs a website, by the way, dedicated to the early church fathers, and you could check out his website, his debates, and all sorts of great stuff that he does at www.patristicpillars.com. And William Albrecht, welcome back to Hands On Apologetics.
Gary, my friend, it is always an incredible pleasure to be able to join you on this great show.
Yeah, well, hey, thanks you. It's great always having you in there. We have the image of a dojo, where you train, you wrestle, you throw down, stuff like that. And, what's beautiful from your experiences, you have done a lot of wrestling, so to speak, in terms of public debates. Do you know what the number is now? Because I know my bio has over 50, but it's got to be pretty far over 50 by now.
It definitely over 60 officially live and moderated debates. I'm guessing unofficial, probably much more than that. I've debated a lot, and I continue debating a lot. I debated last night, and then I've got a debate in Dallas this upcoming Sunday. So I'm debating quite a lot, traveling a lot. Yeah. Reason in Theology is an incredible show there, by the way, Gary, and it hosts a number of different kinds of theology debates, on all kinds of they've covered Islam, they've covered Eastern Orthodoxy. I've helped co-host that show a number of times. Michael's a great guy, incredible host, as you know him very well, very, very bright guy. And last night we debated a topic that has really captivated me for well over a decade, Gary. Well over a decade, I've heard an argument brought up that 8 popes denied the Immaculate Conception of Mary. Now, from a Catholic perspective, we can stop and say, okay, well, in their private thought, maybe they did. It was not ex cathedra. Maybe they did. But in the back of the head, the back of my mind, I love talking about the fathers, the popes, and what have you. I've always thought, it doesn't make sense to me. I can't imagine how a number of these popes, before the dogma was even solidified, how they would come out and deny this teaching on Mary or even denigrate Mary, when the massive amount of fathers that I've read and researched and even provided fresh translations of never talked about Mary in the manner that we are told that these popes do. So I did a bit of digging. Really, Gary, last night's debate is a culmination of nearly a decade of research that really led up to me debating this issue that I think, personally, thank the good Lord, I think it went very well.
Yeah, well, great. Where did this idea come from? Is there a source that, somebody listed these particular popes, or is it kind of taken from many different sources?
Yeah, this comes primarily from a gentleman by the name of Launoy. And Launoy, why? You must be thinking, well, why would Launoy go through the trouble of grabbing a bunch of pieces of quotes from popes here and there? Well, Launoy was protesting the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. Well, you might be wondering why. Well, he was also protesting the teaching of the papacy, and he also stood up against the teaching of Trent. And you might be on the other side, a Protestant, you might be hearing, incredible, a proto-Protestant. He stood up for the true faith. Well, Launoy also denied the pre-existence of Christ. He also denied the biblical teaching of marriage. And he also wrote a book teaching that Mary Magdalene was a legend. Launoy was known by the medieval church to have been a person that would forge documents. He was known to have been a liar, and he really did not have a good reputation at all, Gary.
Yeah, very good. Boy, hopefully we'll be able to get through these. But why don't we start with the list? Who would be the first pope on Launoy's list that supposedly denies the Immaculate Conception?
Yeah, to begin with, we hop on over to the 5th century with Leo the Great, and I'm going to briefly read the heart of what he believed was a denial of the Immaculate Conception. And we hop on over to the Nativity Sermon 21 of Leo, which reads, "There is for all one common measure of joy, because as our Lord, the destroyer of sin and death, finds none free from charge, so he has come to free us all. Truly foreign to this nativity," the birth of Christ is talking about, "is that which we read of all others. No one is clean from the stain of sin, not even the infant who has lived but one day upon the earth. Therefore, of the lust of the flesh has passed into this peerless nativity, nothing of the law of sin has entered." And we read a little bit more of Leo, and you stop and you think, okay, well, where is Leo declaring that Mary was born with original sin? Well, he doesn't declare it. He doesn't even touch upon Mary having sin. But we read a little bit more. And remember, these claims are what these individuals believe are very strong, because you have modern day Protestants and some online Eastern Orthodox individuals that clamp to these and say, well, look, Leo also says, among those that are the sons of men, the Lord Jesus alone was born innocent. Okay, well, the rebuttal shouldn't be too hard, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't believe Mary was a son of man. But let's get a little bit serious here, because when you can easily look at any father, any pope, and you can take what they're writing and you can run with the words. You can read into what they're saying and say, well, you know what? He must have meant Mary as well here. The problem is, Gary, that when these popes do talk about Mary, they show Mary. But in the tome of Leo, when he's talking about human flesh, he says that he took the flesh from Mary. But incredibly enough, Gary, he says nature was taken from the mother of the Lord, not guilt. The Latin non culpa is used there. But that's not the only other part where Leo talks about original sin. So, Gary,
Okay.
that's one pope that we can knock off the list.
Right. Yeah. Very good. All right. That's very interesting. So basically, you could show that the quote that supposedly he denies the Immaculate Conception is open to other interpretations, and then in light of how he uses it elsewhere, how he speaks of Mary, it's clear that he believed in that Mary was preserved from the stain of original sin.
That is definitely correct, Gary. So whenever we read these popes talking, it is always important to realize what is being talked about in context. And then if they make a statement that may seem very broad, well, it's good to always read everything in context. And the Christmas sermons of Leo are the ones that Leo's tome is based upon. And Leo's tome shows us definitively what Leo believed in regards to Mary. By the way, Marian scholars and those whose Latin is impeccable, better than my Latin, all interpret that in that manner, that Leo is clearly saying Mary was an exception to the rule of those that had original sin.
Yeah, very good. All right. So down with Pope 1, 7 to go. Who's next on our list?
We've got Pope Gelasius, Gary, who we're hopping on over to the 5th century. Pope Gelasius, this is an interesting case here because we don't have Pope Gelasius affirming the Immaculate Conception, and we don't have him denying it either. We have so little of what Pope Gelasius even wrote, but what we do read of the claim, this is what is written. It belongs alone to the Immaculate Lamb to have no sin at all. Well, you might hear that and you might say, well, that means Mary must have been a sinner. The problem is, Gary, the context of what Gelasius is talking about. Mary is not sinless by nature. That's not Catholic dogma. She is sinless by grace, the grace that comes from Christ. Secondly, the context of what's being talked about. There is no infection of sin that is being talked about here. We're told that the Immaculate Lamb is the only one that could come to battle death, to die on the cross for us, and to have been the mediator between God and man. The mediator in the sense of 1 Timothy 2, only he could have died on the cross for our sins. No Catholic in the world would argue that Mary died on the cross for their sins at all. Right. Mary is not even a concern here. In fact, when Gelasius does talk about Mary, his language says that Mary is most holy, the sacred ever virgin. In his prayer book, he says, "Deliver us, O Lord, from all evil, past, present, and future, and grant us the intercession of the blessed and glorious ever virgin Mother Mary." So when Gelasius does talk about Mary, he never includes her in the discussion of sin. And rather, this particular passage talking about the Immaculate Lamb is talking about the Lamb that came to suffer and die for our sin.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, we're chatting with William Albrecht. Actually, I think I gave the wrong title. It's 8 popes who supposedly denied the Immaculate Conception of Mary. We got 2 down. We got a few more to go. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics. More to come on the other side of the break. Don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back.
We have an exciting story for you to listen to. The story of John Pridmore. John Pridmore was a hitman for the gangs in East London.
I met some guys who seemed to have everything that I thought would make you happy. So I started working for these people. So to my shame, I was involved in vicious crime of all sorts.
He collected debts for the gangs, and if people didn't pay their debts, it was his job to kill them.
And as I drove home that night, I thought, what have I become? That I could kill someone and not even care.
He was in the elevator on his way up to the 17th floor, and there was a 17-year-old young man in the elevator with him. Suddenly, this young man looked John right in the eye, and he said, "Jesus loves you."
And I said, the first prayer I'd ever said, I said, up to now, all I've done is take from you, God. Now I want to give.
Within a year, by the grace of God, John was able to get out of the gang and be freed from this road to hell that he had been walking on. Go to Virgin Most Powerful YouTube channel and listen to this story today.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Master Apologist William Albrecht about supposedly, this belief that there were 8 popes in history that denied the Immaculate Conception. And William just went through the first 2 and showed that, no, that doesn't seem to ring true with the evidence. William, why don't we begin with number 3 then?
No doubt, Gary. And one thing I would like to point out as well to the audience, the reason I find it so important to really knock down these pillars that have been erected that are really fallacious is because a number of these popes, believe it or not, also fall under the category of early church fathers, because a few of them did write at an early period. So even Pope Gregory, when we hop on over to Pope Gregory, here is the real argument, Gary, and I'm trying to not laugh and be as respectful as possible because these are not good arguments. This is what Gregory does tell us. Moreover, no one among men in this world is without sin. And what else is sinning but flying from God? I talk confidently that this my daughter also has some sins. The problem about this, Gary, really, is number one, what is being talked about here is personal sin. Number two, he's talking about a group of women in that particular point of time that were committing acts of personal sin. But if we go onward and we read a little bit more of Gregory then begins to talk about John the Baptist, Paul, Peter, Mark, Luke, and begins to tell us none of them lacked sin. So we then begin to think, well, when is Gregory going to include Mary in this list? The incredible thing is, Gary, when Gregory does talk about Mary, he has another degree for her. He says that Mary is a mountain, and this mountain has been made the highest mountain because Mary's height has shined out above all the saints. The most blessed and ever Virgin Mary, Mother of God, can be called by this name mountain. She was a mountain who, by the dignity of her election, has completely surpassed the height of every elect creature. Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, but to me it sounds like Gregory is including Mary in a class completely apart from any other saints. As he says, her height has shined out above them all. Isn't that incredible language from Gregory?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. And now, let me ask you a question, William. And that original quote that Lanoy gives, when Gregory says, I say confidently that my daughter also has some sins. Who is my daughter in that context? That's not the Virgin Mary.
No, it is not. And it very, very seems misleading, because if you wouldn't read the rest of it, you wouldn't know what is being talked about. But when you do read the rest of it, you'll find out one thing that I've realized, Gary, and unfortunately I realize in everything that Lanoy puts forth is that it is plucked out of context. Mary is never included in the context of those that are being chastised or being pointed out that they had original sin. The daughter here that had sins is not Mary.
Okay, yeah, that's a good tip for whoever's listening, because whenever you get a quote, it's so important to look up the quote in context, because if you could pluck it out, like William says, you could pluck it out of context and give it a whole different meaning. Like
no
if
doubt.
I were to look at that on the list, I would assume that the Pope was talking about Mary since it's part of the list.
Yes,
apparently,
no doubt, Gary. And at first glance, really, if you really look over the list and you read it real quick in about a minute or two, you're going to think, well, this is really tough to reply to.
Yeah.
And really, it does take time. It's a labor, but a labor of love. But underneath the layers of all of this, Gary, there's no substance there. I hate to say it. I do love to say it, because it only strengthens the faith and your love for our Immaculate Mother. If really the best that can be put forth, as we're going to find in a bit, it really gets even more interesting in a bit. We will be able to cover all 8 popes, don't worry.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let's move on to number 4 then.
Number 4 is John the Fourth, Bishop of Rome, around middle of the 7th century. And I'm going to read this real quick. And in the first place, it is foolish to say that man is without sin, which can by no means be except the one mediator between God and man, Christ, who was conceived and born without sin. For other men are born with original sin, even though living without actual sin are known to bear testimony to the prevarication of Adam. According to the prophet who says, for behold, in iniquity was I conceived, and in sin did my mother conceive me. So we read of John the Fourth, Gary, talking about the fact that all men are born with original sin. Mm-hmm. And then he then goes along and says, well, maybe some live without actual sin, but they're all born in original sin. So you must stop and you think, does John the Fourth believe Mary was born in original sin? Well, he must, right? He's including everybody there. the thing here, Gary, is that Lanoy only provides a little piece of what John IV is talking about. But what about a paragraph later? A paragraph later, John IV continues. He then says, I am going to get to talking about the mother of the Lord. And when he does get to talking about the mother of the Lord, he includes her as an exception. He says, for indeed, the Lord took up true flesh from an undefiled and blessed virgin God-bearer. But the word used there, Gary, for undefiled can be translated as immaculate. He uses the Latin Intemerata, which Father Kentenich and, as you know, Cardinal Henry Newman translate this as an early title that the early church used for Mary that meant sinless, spotless, without any sin at all. So here's the incredible thing, Gary. The very argument for Lanoy is a refutation of him in and of itself, because the very following paragraph, John IV includes Mary as an exception to the rule of those that were born with original sin.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. I've never heard that term before.
I had not either.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, you start reading further, and then you find out, well, it doesn't ring true that he denied that Mary was born without the stain of original sin. That's very good.
Yeah, and the one incredible thing about it, Gary, really is you've got to stop and wonder if Lanoy was smart enough to know to grab a few things here and there. You can't tell me he didn't know a paragraph later that John IV talked about Mary. What Lanoy was banking on was people would not look into this and research this enough. But unfortunately, a lot of people really, well, fortunately, I'd say, have a deep love and care and appreciation for our Blessed Mother. And they did bother to look into this, and they were able to tell that the fraudulent Lanoy was really, really, really wrong.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, back then, if you wanted to research this, you would have to go to a monastery or a university or seminary, find the works, be able to read Latin, and double check it, which would not be very easy. Apparently he didn't anticipate the internet where some of this stuff is available just a few clicks away. Wow,
that is correct.
That's excellent, William. Let's go to number 5 then.
Now, number 5 is going to be really quick. It's going to be real easy to refute this one, because number 5 is Pope Innocent III and a sermon on the purification. I'm going to briefly read what Pope Innocent III supposedly said. It said, but forthwith upon the angel's words, the Holy Ghost came upon her. The Holy Ghost came upon her, but before he had come into her, when in her mother's womb, he cleansed her soul from original sin. But now, too, he came upon her to cleanse her flesh from the foes of sin, and that she might be altogether without wrinkle or spot. Well, the problem here, Gary, is we might, stop and think, well, sounds a bit damaging. When did the Holy Ghost cleanse Mary of original sin? Did she ever have it? Catholicism, and I argue the early church, definitely showed that Mary was preserved from original sin at the very beginning of her existence. She was never touched by sin. So what would Pope Innocent III have been talking about here? Well, Gary, if you go to the original Latin, if you look in the very bottom of the footnote, the very person who published this work himself, Ming, puts in footnote there wondering, how could Innocent III have written this and later contradict himself when he says something completely different? Well, Gary, it turns out that Innocent III never wrote this, because we've got a ton of scholars, one by the name of John Baptist Posa, Father Peter Alba, and patristic expert Theophilus Reynaldus, who say he never wrote anything of the sort, but rather this was written by someone else. Another scholar by the name of Brasso studied this and said this was never written by Pope Innocent III. So we have something that is very consistent. Now, what do I mean by consistent? It's consistent with Launoy, who was known to have forged fraudulent documents under the names of other individuals. And unfortunately, a pope never wrote this.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. So you dug down into this, and it turns out it's actually a spurious quotation altogether.
It does, Gary. And the reason we know it doesn't make any sense, because the very same Pope Innocent III, in a Gallican decree in 1215 for the Diocese of Reims in France, instituted the Feast of the Conception of Mary. It would have made no sense at all, Gary. And when we look at the evidence and we compare the evidence to documents that are not forged, we realize these arguments completely fall apart.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, the conception of Mary, very good point. Yeah, how does that all fit together? It doesn't. All right, we're chatting with Master Apologist William Albrecht about 8 popes who supposedly denied the Immaculate Conception. More to come on the other side of the break, folks. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics.
This is Terry Barber, and Myra Brown is with me. Myra, welcome.
Hi, Terry. I am so happy to be here with you today because I am up to something that I think you'll find very interesting.
Tell me, what is it, Myra?
Well, I want to give away a DVD, your famous 3-hour talk about how to share your faith with everyone. And do you know how I'm going to do it?
Tell me.
Well, me and my friend Annie Jo are calling everybody to talk about monthly donations because that is how we keep this station alive.
Absolutely.
And so every person that answers either our email or answers our phone call will get that talk.
And they can get it by calling 877-526-2151. And just tell us how you heard about it, because I really am excited about Myra's project, because we want to have Virgin Most Powerful in every state in the Union.
Yep, and we're going to do it with your help. So answer the phone call, answer that email, and I look forward to getting your prayer intention then.
God love you.
In Luke 7, Jesus said, "I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven her, because she has been shown great love." According to St. John of the Cross, Christians should always remember that the value of their good works is not based on number and excellence. Their value is based on the love for God that prompts them to do the works. May we always be motivated by true love for God, and not worry so much about what we do, but why we do it.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Master Apologist William Albrecht about whether or not there were 8 popes that supposedly denied the Immaculate Conception. And William is knocking them out of the park one after another, and we just finished number 5 with Innocent III. William, anything you want to add to that particular citation?
No doubt, Gary. Yeah, I would love to add a little bit more there. When we look at Innocent III, we look at the fact that first we've got to look at the evidence of what is the supposed negativity that's being said. Then we compare that to documents that we know are definitely from him, where he instituted the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in France. And we wonder, well, even if we were to take for granted, Gary, and grant that he did deny the Immaculate Conception at one point. We know for a fact he believed in it before he died, but we don't grant it because there's so many scholars that say those are not his words. So we have to look at the evidence, and the evidence is overwhelming that there was a diocese in Reims that proceeded over a feast, and there, that synod, over a synod, that the feast was instituted for the conception of Mary, and that came from Pope Innocent III. We know Pope Innocent III definitely believed that Mary was immaculate.
Yeah, very good. So, spurious citations, that's not going to give very much confidence in the rest of the voice list. Let's go to number 6. Who's number 6?
Yeah, and we've got a doozy more coming up. We got some good stuff. Another one coming up, we've got another Pope Innocent. This one, Pope Innocent V, who wrote probably his most popular work called A Commentary on Peter Lombard's Sentences. I mean, around the time that Innocent V wrote, everybody was writing commentaries on Peter Lombard's sentences. So Innocent V wrote this, and these really are his words. He said, Mary was sanctified a little bit after her animation, either on the very day or hour, although not at the same moment. Now you might stop and wonder, whoa, what is Innocent V talking about here? It really does sound like he's talking about Mary being purified from original sin. Mm-hmm. The problem is this, Gary. Launoy doesn't provide the whole context, because the whole context is about 10 pages worth of Innocent V setting up hypotheticals. And at the very end, he says, what is the kind of purification Mary received? It was not a purification from sin. And he then says, I believe Mary was cleansed in the exact way St. John of Damascus believed. Well, St. John of Damascus believed that Mary was immaculate. What did John of Damascus say? Oh, most blessed loins of Joachim, from which came forth a spotless seed. So if he's talking about a conception in the exact way, we know what he's talking about. But this is the clincher, Gary. Here's the real one that refutes everything that they put forth. And this is Pope Innocent V. I think that a more copious grace of sanctification descended on her, not only to sanctify her birth, but thereafter to guard her clean from every sin. Therefore, God forbid that his house would have anything tarnished in it, that the brush of Lazarus would be sought in it. Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the house of the Lord would never have anything tarnished in it, it really does sound to me like Pope Innocent V believed Mary was guarded from every sin. Actually, he says it himself. She would be guarded clean from every sin. Now that, Gary, would not just be personal sin. That would be original sin as well.
Yeah. It would be hard to conceive someone who's in original sin, conceive of somebody that's in original sin, and yet, purified from all sin, it doesn't make much sense. I like that he refers to Damascene, because to my mind, William, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that is a very powerful text that suggests Immaculate Conception, because he actually speaks of Joachim, conceiving Mary in the womb of St. Anne, through a spotless seed, he says.
For me, that is a clincher.
Yeah, so if he goes along with that, I think that in and of itself is a kind of clinching moment.
No doubt, because remember, when he's talking about Mary being sanctified, he's setting up a bunch of hypotheticals saying, well, could she have been sanctified before birth? Could it have been during birth? Could it have been after? And then he finally says, my conclusion is that she was purified in the exact way John of Damascus is talking about it. And John of Damascus believed in the Immaculate Conception, Gary. For me, that is a complete clincher.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, it's kind of pulled out of context.
Definitely. You're right. 100%
and
right.
William, this is also something that, the Immaculate Conception in and of itself is pretty straightforward. But there are a lot of side issues that throughout history does make it a little bit complex. For example, the idea of, well, when, is conception something different than animation?
Correct.
Or how is original sin transmitted? Is it through the sin of, the conjugal act of the parents? Or is it some, there's like all these side issues that also kind of play into this. So,
no doubt.
So, of course there's going to be speculation as to, okay, well, how do we reconcile the belief in Immaculate Conception with the current views about, how the development of the inborn child and things like that?
No doubt. Incredible point, Gary. And that would have been why a lot of popes simply just don't even talk about the issue. The theology had not developed enough at their point in time. A few of them just pass over it completely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even Thomas Aquinas, he struggled with
no doubt
purified animation or conception, and
definitely.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'm getting off track. We got 2 more popes to go. Who's number 7 on the list?
Funny enough, Gary, we've got Launoy writes Pope John the 22nd or Benedict the 12th. Now, you might be thinking, what? I know. Launoy doesn't even know what he's talking about. And let me read the quote real quickly. We must look to her, the Virgin Mary, passing from the state of original sin to the state of grace, to the state of filiation to maternal honor, then from the state of misery to the state of glory. So Mary was in original sin for a moment, then she went to grace, maternal honor, misery, then to glory. The problem is, Gary, this quote doesn't exist in any of these popes' works. John the 22nd or Benedict the 12th. Every papal expert that have studied and looked in the codices, in the manuscripts that exist, it was not written by them. It is yet another forgery, fraudulent quote that was not written by them.
Wow. Well, that explains why you can't figure out which pope it is.
Yeah, correct. That would have explained why he doesn't know what he's talking about, Gary.
Yeah. Tell me, William. I haven't seen the original. Does he give references where to find these quotes?
Funny enough, Gary, in some parts he does, but in this particular area, he writes, "Well, you can find this codex in the Mazarin library," but then towards the end of his writing, he says, "Well, it's not there anymore. It used to be there." You've got to really wonder what was going through his mind when he's unable to even give the location for these sermons. And we've got a ton of scholars that were not just scholars, but scholars on these popes that tell us it was not written by them at all. I don't know who wrote it, they'll tell us, but it was not written by a pope.
So he says that it was in this library, you can find it in this library, and then he says, well, it's not there anymore. So
it's not there anymore.
So he must have, if he even saw the quote, like it actually existed, that's just a memory of his.
It's just a memory. He's probably quoting it from his head. Doesn't exist anywhere. And unfortunately, it was left in history. And a lot of people believe it to be a valid quote. And it does not exist, Gary. Wow. It was not from any pope.
Yeah, boy. And that makes it really difficult, doesn't it? Because it's one thing to give a reference where you can read the context and everything. But if you can't even find the manuscript, how in the world?
No doubt, because I'm sure this work does exist somewhere, no doubt, but it's not written from any pope. And even if it does exist somewhere, we need context, not a tiny little quote.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole the whole strength of the list of the 8 popes is that they're popes. So if this is a pseudo somebody, what weight does it have anyway?
Wouldn't carry a whole lot of weight at all, Gary. If it was not from the Bishop of Rome and it was written from somebody simply just putting their thoughts there, it really doesn't carry much weight, does it?
No. Well, we got a couple minutes left. We got one last pope. Why don't we jump to him?
This is going to be the final one. I can't wait to finally knock down the final pillar, Gary. Pope Clement VI. Let me briefly read it. Whether Mary contracted original or sin in the original form or was preserved by divine virtue, the opinions of the doctors are altogether different. Nevertheless, whatever the case may be, what if even in the form, not only in the cause, she had original sin, which we can still very reasonably uphold. Nevertheless, according to the common opinion, the Virgin Mary was in original sin, but only for a brief time. Because according to all, she would have been sanctified right away, and she was sanctified. So the Blessed Virgin had original sin. We're told from Pope Clement VI in the 14th century, Gary.
Okay.
Or are we really told that?
I'm beginning to wonder, William.
The problem here is we've got guys, really titans, like men by the name of Father Raymundum, Henry Warthonis, a gentleman by the name of Udinus, and a gentleman by the name of Brasso, who all of them go and they look in the original manuscripts. They look in the codices. They looked in the Library of Reims in Codex 22, which contained all of the sermons of Clement VI. And what do they say? It's not printed anywhere. It's fraudulent, Gary. It's another fraud.
There you go. Well, you can't believe everything you read, William.
No.
And you proved it for us. Where can people go to get your stuff?
www.patristicpillars.com. And you can find talks, debates, and everything there on the front page, and my blog posts there as well.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, William. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that concludes our program, folks. Man, time flies, but nevertheless, the fun continues with the Terry and Jesse show coming up next. High Impact Catholic Talk. And for me, it's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center, turn off the dojo lights. Thank you so much for tuning in. And God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church, so I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.